This episode is brought to you by Hive.
You know, history is full of transformations. The Romans shifted from republic to empire. The Tudors transformed monasteries into country houses. And do you know what? Hive has had one of its own. Everybody knows Hive for smart thermostats, but now they've evolved into something much greater.
Solar panels that help you to power your home with clean energy. Heat pumps that pull warmth from thin air. EV chargers that charge your car while you're asleep. All managed through a single app.
This is all about giving people the power to transform their homes. From waste to efficiency. From dependence to control. From consumption to contribution.
So history's next great transformation may not be happening in parliaments or palaces. It may be happening in your home. A quiet revolution, minus guillotines.
Hive. Know your power. Visit hivehome.com to find out more. Subject to survey and suitability. Hive app compatible with selected heat pumps.
Nelson gazed out at the spires of the Danish capital. With luck, he thought, the enemy would soon come to terms, and he could leave the city unscathed. That night, he invited his captains aboard the Elephant for a final dinner. He was in the highest spirits, one remembered, and drank to the success of the ensuing day. As they left, Nelson shook each man by the hand and wished him luck. When they had gone, he lay sleepless in his cot, listening to the creak of the timbers. Everything, he thought, depended on a fair wind to push them into the enemy's harbour. Dawn came. Thursday, the 2nd of April, 1801. Another grey, dreary day. But as Nelson stepped onto the quarterdeck, a smile spread across his face. The wind had changed and was blowing from the southeast. The conditions could not have been better. His personal troubles were forgotten. This was his world, the swell of the sea, the burden of command, the thrill of battle. God was with them, he thought, and ordered his crew to hoist signal 14. Prepare for battle. A thrilling and thoroughly patriotic scene from What Else? Adventures in Time, Nelson, Hero of the Seas, by top Nelson scholar Dominic Sambrook. Out last week, I think, in paperback. So a splendid read. And I mean, the drama of it. We're in the spring of 1801 and Britain is facing a potentially mortal threat to her very survival as an independent power. So there is a huge strategic crisis that has hoved into view. Britain, if she's to have any hope of maintaining her independence against France, needs to control the seas. But the problem is that a new Tsar, Paul I, hates a waistcoat, loves issuing intemperate orders to his servants. He has organized a new league of armed neutrality, which actually isn't neutral at all, because it's directly targeted at the monopoly of supplies that Britain needs to maintain the Royal Navy. And this would then facilitate the growth of the French Navy, thereby threatening Britain's command of the seas. So, Dominic, what is Britain to do? When you're faced with a national emergency, who do you send for?
Well, they send for Nelson because, as you've described, the countries of the Baltic have let themselves down by forming this League of Armed Neutrality, especially, I have to say, the Danes.
I know, who are almost like Englishmen, according to Nelson. And you don't get higher praise than that, do you?
Right. They're a slightly worse version of Englishmen. And for them to rank themselves alongside the Russians, and as you say, implicitly, the French, because this will be a gift to Napoleon Bonaparte.
I mean, that's the real shocker, isn't it?
It is, exactly. So the Admiralty's reaction has been to send this squadron east to break this league by force. And first in line is the Danish fleet and the dockyards at Copenhagen. And listeners who remember our last episode will recall that the commander of the fleet is not Nelson. It is the elderly Admiral Sir Hyde Parker, who has somehow managed to tear himself away from the delights of his teenage bride.
This is the paradox, isn't it? That the reason perhaps why Nelson hasn't been given command is because there's a slight shadow over his reputation as a consequence of his affair with Emma Hamilton. But Sir Hyde Parker isn't a model of propriety at all.
It takes all sorts. I don't want to pronounce on the nature of his relationship with this young woman. As you rightly say, there is this shadow hanging over Horatio Nelson, which is the fact that he has abandoned his wife Fanny for Emma Hamilton. And I see that you've added the words luscious in the notes, Tom.
You in your notes have described Emma as vile. I've crossed that out. I mean, I think it's an accurate description of her.
Listeners can make up their own minds, of course. We pride ourselves, don't we, that we have these little disagreements, unlike some Goalhanger podcasts, which boast of disagreeing agreeably, but never disagree about anything. That's not the case on The Rest is History.
No, we disagree about top mistresses and other such vital topics.
We do, exactly. So we ended last time with intelligence reaching the fleet that Copenhagen's defences are even more formidable than Parker and Nelson expected. Huge citadel batteries, 2 massive forts bristling with guns, and the Danes have created this defensive line, this kind of wall of guns made up of warships and hulks and sort of floating gun platforms facing the sea.
And there's one particular fortress, isn't there, that's kind of outside, which is built on solid rock. So that's also got to be negotiated.
Exactly, yeah. And of course, the water is very shallow. As always in naval battles, there's lots of action with shoals. So they have to get around this.
And flat bottoms.
Exactly, this shoal. So Nelson has urged Admiral Parker to launch the attack anyway. Never did our country depend so much on the success of any fleet as on this. And we ended with Parker's answer, which is, sure, all right, but you will lead the attack personally. Now, some people would find that daunting. Of course, Nelson is not a man to be daunted. He's excited. He's thrilled. On the 27th of March, he moves his flag from the St. George, which is the ship he'd been given back in England, to the 74-gun ship Elephant. The elephant, as Andrew Lambert points out, ironically, the badge of the Danish monarchy.
And the reason he's moving, isn't it, is that the Elephant has what naval people call a shallower draft.
Yeah, talk us through the shallower draft.
Well, it means it's better able to cope with the shallows because, Dominic, it draws less water.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, it does. Basically, it can go in shallower water than the St. George can. So that's why he moves. And of course, when he moves, he makes sure to take with him his 2 most prized possessions, which are portraits of Emma, his guardian angels, he calls them. So they go into his new cabin. So that's splendid.
That's very moving. So from the Elephant, he will command this squadron of 6 other 74s. So the 74-gun ship is the sort of classic warship of the Royal Navy. So you've got the Defiance, the Ganges, the Edgar, the Bellona, the Russell, and the Monarch. Then there are 3 64-gun ships, and there are various frigates and fireships. And crucially, there are 7 bomb vessels. And these are ships that will start shelling the Danish dockyards once Nelson's warships have cleared out the defences.
And Dominic, just a couple of things to say about that. Firstly, the Edgar, one of the ships, named after Athelstan's nephew. And Athelstan, of course, defeated the Danes. So maybe there's a slight kind of portent there. And the other thing is the identity of one of Nelson's captains, who is in command of a 56er. So not quite as many guns, but still very, very formidable, as we'll see. This is a ship called the HMS Glatton. And the commander of that is Captain Bligh, who 12 years before had been in command of a ship called the Bounty in the Pacific Ocean that had witnessed a famous mutiny. So Bligh has lots to prove. And fortunately, the Glatton is a kind of ship that would enable him to prove things because it's armed with this new kind of cannon, the carronade, which is very short range. So if you can get the ship up close, it will inflict incredible damage on its target. Massive guns, and they are mounted on pivots, so they can swivel round and they sweep at a range of targets. And as we will see, this makes the Glatton a very, very formidable addition to Nelson's armoury.
Right. But getting into the harbour is going to be a tough job. They're waiting for the wind to sweep them in. And they haven't even got up to Copenhagen yet. So on the 30th of March, the wind finally shifts because they've been waiting for 3 days. And they sail south into the Øresund, which is the strait between Denmark and Sweden.
What is it?
It's called the Øresund, Tom.
Master of tongues.
I'm just guessing. I saw an O with an accent, and I thought I'd mix it up a bit. Anyway, they sail into this strait, and ahead is this this great fortress of Kronborg, which is the castle of Elsinore, as in Hamlet.
Yeah.
And they're worried that there are great guns at the castle, so they go over to the Swedish side of the strait.
Although, Dominic, there's a risk there as well, isn't there? Because Sweden also is part of this league. They don't know how many guns might be there and whether the Swedes would fire them.
The Swedes are not cut from the same cloth that they were in the Great Northern War, I think, by this point. They've already started to move in a Greta Thunberg-style direction.
Yeah.
Because they don't fire.
And actually, it turns out they don't really have any guns there anyway. So Nelson's gamble pays off.
Exactly. So the Danish guns can't reach the British ships. The British do fire on Elsinore, don't they? Because isn't there a cannonball stuck in the cathedral roof or something?
Yeah, apparently.
So on they go into the strait. In the distance, 20 miles away is their target, the city of Copenhagen. Now, for a couple of days, they remain at anchor. It's really, really cold. The weather is terrible. And Nelson sends these little scouting parties into what is called the outer deep, which is the sort of the sea beyond, just outside Copenhagen. It's all very icy, so it's kind of floating ice, and they're kind of cutting their way through. And their job is to check out the Danish defences.
They have to do it at night, don't they?
Yeah, it's very Hollywood, this.
So kind of muffled oars, and they can only use candles to inspect their charts and things. The amazing thing is that obviously this is the kind of adventure that Nelson is gagging to join in. And so he himself, even though he's the commander, goes out and joins these routines as well. Very dramatic scene.
Yeah, he loves all this. And if you remember from last time, he has been going through agonies in his cabin, writing these letters to Emma about his paranoia that she's going to run off with the future Prince Regent, the future George IV. But this is the one time where you feel like a lot of these cares slip away, because this is really what he loves doing. He just loves throwing himself into this kind of adventuring.
And also hanging out with his band of brothers.
Yeah, and there's still a band of brothers element to this. So on the night of the 31st, after dinner, he has a council of war aboard the Elephant. And a lot of the captains who are coming with him on this expedition are people that he served alongside at the Battle of the Nile. So names like Thomas Foley, Thomas Fremantle, George Murray. The most famous of them is Thomas Masterman Hardy, who actually volunteers to leave his own ship and come over to the Elephant because he's so keen to be in on the action. And in the last couple of episodes, we talked a lot about the downsides of working with Horatio Nelson. But this is a reminder of just how inspirational, how stirring a figure he is, that there are people who want to put themselves in harm's way just to be at his side in the thick of the action.
Well, it's the Nelson touch, isn't it? The sense that huge drama is going to happen and it's probably going to work out well.
Yeah, and he is a man who's brilliant at bringing people into his confidence and inspiring them. There are these sort of descriptions of him. There's a guy called Colonel Stewart, William Stewart, who's commanding the sort of ground troops they brought with them. And Stewart describes Nelson afterwards as pacing up and down, shaking his head at any sign of alarm or irresolution, burning with excitement and energy as he describes his plan. This is a preview of what he will do at Trafalgar, of course, sharing his plan with his captains.
Yeah, and he's brilliant at generating this kind of sense of a shared bond. I mean, almost a kind of a manly love.
Yeah.
That animates everybody in command under Nelson to feel that they're part of a shared enterprise, and that enterprise is going to be something bold, something dramatic, and ultimately something successful that you simply wouldn't get with any other admiral. And a glaring contrast with Sir Hyde Parker, who's not part of this. I mean, he's kind of stuck in the rear. He's absolutely not the kind of person who could marshal this kind of project.
No, exactly.
And in fact, is quite nervous about it.
Well, he's nervous because it's a very risky plan. Basically, what they're going to do is they're going to sail into Copenhagen harbour from the southeast. And to do that, they'll have to loop around this central sort of shoal or sandbank known as the middle ground. And if they loop around that and come up from the south, that will bring them into what's called the King's Deep, which is this quite narrow channel between the shoal and the city.
But is, as its name suggests, deep. Because I suppose the risk is that, I mean, it's exactly the risk that Nelson faced at the Battle of the Nile, where similarly there were kind of shoals and islands and sandbanks and so on. And listeners may remember that one of the most celebrated of all Nelson's captains, Thomas Trowbridge, ends up stranded there. And he's terribly upset about this. And Nelson has to push for him to get a medal, even though he hadn't taken part in the fight.
That's right.
And there is absolutely a risk, because actually the channel here, the deep, is even narrower than it had been in Egypt, that people will get stranded similarly. However, Nelson has made this less likely by having the shoals marked out with buoys, because normally there would be buoys there, but the Danes have removed the buoys to make it more challenging for the British. And he has a splendid man, splendid officer who he entrusts with this task. And this is a guy called Captain Edward Riou, who's a very junior officer, but has had an amazing career. So he'd been a midshipman on Cook's third and final voyage, the voyage in which Captain Cook ends up being killed in Hawaii.
Yeah.
There'd been massive drama with a convict ship that he'd been in command of. He was taking prisoners to Botany Bay, and they had tried to get water from an iceberg, and the iceberg had sliced a hole in the bottom of the ship.
Wow.
And they kept trying to bail the water out. And some of the crew say, oh, this is hopeless, we're getting out of here. And they go off in ships. But Riou stays on board and he uses the convicts as a crew. So it's almost the opposite of Bligh. Bligh had lost his crew. Riou recruits convicts to serve him as his crew. And somehow they manage to survive and they get rescued. I don't know if you've read Desolation Island.
Of course, Patrick O'Brian.
So this is exactly the plot of that. It's a direct inspiration for it.
Yeah, it's an amazing scene in Patrick O'Brian.
Yeah. And so there's something of Jack Aubrey, Patrick O'Brien's hero, about Captain Riou. And you can see exactly why that would appeal to Nelson. And so he has given Riou not command of a kind of major ship of the line, but of a small squadron of frigates. And he gives him a kind of roving commission in the battle to come. You know, if kind of happenstance intervenes, if things go wrong, Riou is to rely on his initiative and basically behave as Nelson likes to behave in battles.
Yeah. So that's how they're getting round the sandbanks or the shoals. But once they've done that, they're then into the harbour and there's this line of Danish ships. Now here they really have to take a gamble. Each of Nelson's ships is given a different target and they kind of move up the line towards their targets one by one. And they keep going till they've cleared them all out of the way. And Nelson says, when you do this, the Danes will be absolutely, there will be a blizzard of Danish fire. But we should get, quote, so close to our enemies that every shot cannot miss. Let's give them that hailstorm of bullets which gives our dear country the dominion of the seas. That's very Nelson.
And that's why the carronades are so useful in such a fight.
Yeah. Plus, getting up really close. So you advance closer and closer in the face of their withering fire, and then you just unload and unleash hell on them. So you've got to be pretty brave. All right. We come to the morning of the 1st of April. The wind has begun to shift in their favour. Nelson calls the masters and the pilots of the ships for a last briefing on the Elephant. Then he himself gets into a little rowing boat and he goes to visit as many ships as he can. And there's a midshipman who remembers, he says, I always remember Nelson, his squeaking little voice and his Norfolk drawl.
Like Alan Partridge.
Alan Partridge, yeah. Exactly. Very good. So they start to move south that afternoon. When they see the signal to begin the operation, great cheers rise from the crews. And in the distance, of course, they can now see the spires of Copenhagen, and they can also make out the outline of the defensive line across the harbour, this wall of guns. And as dusk is falling, we have that scene that you opened with, Tom. I described in such purple prose.
Stirring prose, Dominic.
Oh, thanks, Tom.
Honestly, I read it and I felt a thrill.
Well, there is no higher recommendation than that. And parents listening to this podcast should immediately run out and buy this book for their children. I mean, you have already, but just buy more copies.
Yeah, Christmas is coming.
Exactly. So there's dinner. They drink a toast to victory. And then Nelson, of course, stays up late, doesn't he?
And he has Riou with him.
With Riou, right. And what are they doing?
Well, they're drawing up very, very detailed plans. So this is not really a battle where Nelson wants captains to show initiative. I mean, if they have to, then they do. But if they can possibly avoid it, then they're given very precise instructions. So, for instance, about which of the enemy ships to target. And they draw these up and Riou helps him. And then these orders are sent out to all the various ships so that every captain knows what is expected of him.
Well, a lot of them have pieces of paper. They actually hold pieces of paper, almost like index cards, telling them what to do. Now, that night, not surprisingly, Nelson finds it very hard to sleep. He's constantly calling for news of the wind. He needs the wind to be able to speed them into the harbour. When he wakes, he gets the news that he wanted. The wind is with them. So, 6 o'clock. Nelson's up. He's dressed. He has had his breakfast. He has his plans written out on these cards. They're little cards that he can hold in one hand. Why? Because he doesn't have two hands, of course, because he'd lost his arm. At 8 o'clock, as we heard in the introduction, he hoists signal 14, prepare for battle. And then at about 9:45, another signal goes up. He tells the first 4 ships, they are the Edgar, which you described, the Ardent, the Glatton,
So that's under Bligh.
that's Bligh, and the Isis, to weigh anchor and to advance around the shoals into the King's Deep. And then 10 minutes later, the next lot of ships, the Agamemnon, the Bellona, the Ganges, the Monarch, the Defiance, the Russell, and the Polyphemus.
And it's an excruciating moment, I guess, for Nelson, because now the huge anxiety is, are any of his ships going to be stranded? And yet what a thrill he must have felt at seeing the execution of his battle plan.
Oh, yeah.
So nervousness and excitement kind of intermingled.
I think the only reason that Hollywood hasn't made films of these kinds of things is just so complicated and expensive, because it's such a cinematic scene. The British ships, most of them have painted their hulls dark yellow and black. So the Wolverhampton Wanderers colours, Tom.
And the colours that visitors to HMS Victory at Portsmouth will have seen.
Exactly. So they look incredible and they move very slowly, obviously. They're kind of gliding into position. Their decks have been cleared for action. You know, what a sight they must have been. Just the spectacle of it.
I always think in these naval battles, particularly under Nelson, where the point is to get up very close and inflict maximum damage. This is not what conventionally happens in battles. That the contrast between the unbelievable violence that is threatening and the slow and stately pace with which the ships glide towards their enemies must ratchet up the tension to a peculiar degree.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a wonderful description by a midshipman on the Monarch, which was near the back of the line. And this is a guy called William Salter Millard. I'll quote him again later. He said when he saw the Edgar leading the way as they sort of begin their turn, it was the most beautiful and solemn spectacle he'd seen in his life. A man of war under sail is at all times a beautiful object, but at such a time, the scene is heightened beyond the powers of description. We saw her pressing on through the enemy's fire. This is the Edgar. Our minds were deeply impressed with awe, and not a word was spoken throughout the ship, but by the pilot and the helmsman.
Yeah, that silence of people knowing that very soon they're going to be standing on a deck that is going to be ravaged and raked by cannon fire and sniper shot. I mean, oh.
And what makes it even more cinematic, this sense of spectacle, is that the people of Copenhagen have come out to watch. So there are thousands of people, crowds on the waterfront, people packed onto the quays, onto the balconies, onto the roofs of the houses. They're watching it as though it's a great sporting occasion or something.
Well, Nelson loves an audience, doesn't he? I mean, in a way, he's a kind of great dramatist.
Yes, exactly. So the Edgar leads the way around the middle ground and comes up from the south into the King's Deep. And ahead are the Citadel batteries, the line of 18 Danish ships moored in the harbour, and the 2 Danish forts, and all of them are making ready to fire on the invaders. The first shots come at around 10:15. The first Danish ship, the Prøvestenen,
Love it.
opens fire on the Edgar. And then, one by one, the British ships move up the line and other Danish ships start firing too. So you have the crash of thunder and smoke pouring above the harbour and all of this kind of thing.
Which is so thick that the people actually who've come out to watch can't see it.
Yeah, disappointing.
And for the ships themselves, I mean, you know, again, it's actually quite hard to distinguish who you're firing at.
Right. And this slight sense of chaos is heightened by the fact that further back, not unpredictably, some of the British ships have started to run aground on the shoals.
Yeah, and this is the big issue.
So for all the efforts of this guy, Ryu, it's really hard for them to work out where the shoals begin and end. 3 of them in particular, the Agamemnon, the Bellona, and the Russell, have got stuck. So that means that they can still fire at the Danes, but they're kind of sitting ducks themselves. They're just sort of stuck there.
And also it means that Nelson's line is now shortened because, you know, he had 12 ships of the line. He's lost 3. So his line is much shorter than he had planned. However, people may remember that Ryu has been given a kind of roving brief by Nelson. And so he, in an unprompted but very Nelsonian manner, comes to the rescue. He's on a ship called the Amazon. He's got 4 other frigates with him. So that's about, 150 guns between them. And they work their way up the British line, you know, dense cannon smoke drifting everywhere. And they situate themselves at the head of the line so that the loss of these three massive ships is not quite as bad and damaging as it might otherwise have been. And this is exactly what Nelson would have wanted Ryu to do, even though he has no direct orders, because obviously communication between Nelson's flagship and Ryu is impossible.
That's right. So by about 11:30, all of Nelson's ships are engaged in one way or another. And the Elephant is now flying Nelson's favorite signal, which is signal number 16. Engage the enemy more closely. Now, the Danes, I know we have Danish listeners, and I definitely don't want to make this an anti-Danish podcast. That's the last thing we would ever do. They are fighting with enormous courage. They knew from the beginning that they were really up against it, that they couldn't really compete with the Royal Navy, but they were determined to kind of fight for their capital city anyway. So they're blasting away from their ships and their gun platforms. In his book, Empire of the Deep, the historian Ben Wilson makes what should be the obvious point, but it hadn't really occurred to me, that there is a massive difference between this and previous battles. Previously, when Nelson fought the Spanish or the French, they'd sort of fought on, as it were, neutral territory, out at sea or in Egypt or whatever. But this is very different. The Danes are defending their own capital city, their own homes, their native land, in front of their friends and families, who are the people watching from the quaysides.
Well, I mean, for the Danes, it's a home match, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they don't get to fight many home matches, I would guess, the Danes.
Historically, the Danes have preferred to fight their matches on English soil.
Yes, exactly.
There's an element of vengeance for Lindisfarne there, perhaps.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that scar will never really heal, will it?
Not really, no.
So the Danes are inflicting tremendous damage. Nelson's ships are taking horrific punishment. So the Edgar, under Captain George Murray, as you said, named after Edgar the Peaceable, great law and order enthusiast.
Yeah, in the 10th century.
The Edgar is taking colossal damage. 142 men killed and wounded. The Ardent loses almost 100 men, and its sails and its hull are absolutely perforated by Danish shot. But worst of all, the Monarch at the back of the line. This is absolutely hammered by those Danish forts. So the Monarch lost 220 men killed and wounded. One of them was the captain, who's a guy called James Moss, who was killed on the quarterdeck, holding his battle plan in one hand and a speaking trumpet in the other, through which he was kind of rousing his men.
And Dominic, it's not surprising that under such a firestorm, the captain and many other officers would be killed, because those who are not officers are allowed to duck when cannonballs come in. Officers are not supposed to. You're supposed to stand there upright. And we'll be hearing accounts in this story of officers who just kind of disintegrate, get torn in two. The courage required to be an officer in the Royal Navy under gunfire, I think, is just insane.
Imagine, I mean, we've described it in a slightly offhand way, but just imagine sailing your ship, advancing very slowly towards a fort or a gun platform that's just sitting there blasting at you, and you just say, keep going, closer, closer.
Which is why, historically, this is not how battles have been fought. And what Nelson is relying on, I suppose, is two things. Firstly, the superior quality of British gunnery, which is easily the best in the world. And secondly, the martial spirit of his captains. And that's why this sense of a band of brothers, the sense of the Nelson touch, the sense of his charisma animating the battle line is so important. Because I think under Hyde Parker, for instance, they would not behave with such courage. But knowing that Nelson believes in them clearly gives them the courage to sustain this appalling damage and constantly run the risk of death.
To walk into the jaws of death.
Yeah.
And, Nelson, he is the embodiment of this, but he has to be, it's very important to him that he is the physical embodiment of this spirit. This again anticipates what we see at Trafalgar. So on the quarterdeck of the Elephant, he is pacing up and down under fire, heedless of his own safety. So Colonel Stewart, the guy I quoted earlier, is at his side. Stewart went on to fight in the Peninsular War with tremendous sort of courage and acclaim. But he said afterwards that he had never felt such admiration for any officer on sea or on land as he did for Nelson at Copenhagen. There's a point at which a Danish shot smashes into their mainmast and it showers them with splinters. A splinter can kill you. And Nelson has, of course, been hit by a splinter before at the Nile. But Nelson, just oblivious to it, says to Stewart, "It is warm work, and this day may be the last for any of us at any moment. But mark you, I would not be anywhere else for thousands."
And that, for me, is the embodiment of British pluck. The other splendidly British thing that Nelson says at this point is he draws on a cricket metaphor.
Yeah.
He's anxious that perhaps this is going to take slightly longer than he thought, but still confident of victory. And he says, we shall bowl them out in 4 if we cannot do it in 3 hours. So in other words, dismiss the opposition batsman.
And slowly but surely, the things you described, British teamwork, training, firepower, speed, they are beginning to tell. The Danes just, for all their efforts, they just can't compete with it. By about 1 o'clock, their flagship, which is called the Dannebrog, 74-gun ship, is in real trouble. It's being pounded, isn't it, by Captain Bligh's ship?
Yeah, by the Gatton. And this is where the carronades are coming into their own, of course, because they are absolutely lethal at short range. And that is exactly where Bligh is. I mean, he's right up close against the Danish flagship.
So there's another Danish ship, the Sealand, which has lost a third of its crew. It's lost its mast. It lost its guns. It's riddled with holes. Most of its surviving crew are desperately getting into little boats to get away. And it starts to drift, doesn't it?
Yeah, because they cut the cables.
It's kind of drifting across the battle line.
Like a ghost ship almost. I mean, very eerie. You can imagine it kind of looming out of the gun smoke and nobody knows where it's going, caught on the currents. I mean, an awesome sight.
And then there's a third ship, the Prøvestinen. This has been swept clear with grape shot, the upper decks. Its guns are disabled. 3 fires are burning on this ship. 75 men are either dead or horribly wounded. It really feels at this point, we're about 1 o'clock, that it is only a matter of time before the Danish line disintegrates completely, and then Nelson can send in these bomb vessels to start shelling the city. And then, at about 1:30, something else happens. So behind them is Admiral Hyde Parker with the reserve. He's with the rest of the British ships. And from behind them, Nelson and his officers hear the dull thud of 2 guns, a signal. And they turn and they can't believe their eyes, because on the mast of Admiral Parker's flagship, they can see a new signal, which is signal number 39, discontinue the action. And what has happened? Parker has been watching this slaughter unfold, and he is calling the whole thing off. It will all be for nothing. All of their effort, all of the sacrifice, all the bloodshed will have been pointless. And on the quarterdeck of the Elephant, all eyes turn to Nelson. What will he do now?
Wow. Well, I think we should take a break at this point. And when we come back, we have the massive excitement of describing one of the most iconic and quite possibly mythic episodes in the whole of British history. This episode is brought to you by Vanguard. Now, thrillingly, this name, Vanguard, was inspired by HMS Vanguard, the flagship of none other than Admiral Nelson.
He pursues the French to Aboukir Bay on the shores of Egypt for the Battle of the Nile and saved the world from Napoleon, really. So great scenes.
So tremendous record there from Vanguard, a ship that certainly saw no lack of action.
Yes. Now, speaking of action, if you want to put your financial plans into action, but you've been putting off sorting out your ISA, or if you're new to investing and you don't know where to start, Vanguard offers a range of ISA options, including their managed ISA, which could be a great fit.
So essentially, it's a stocks and shares ISA, but it is managed by the experts of Vanguard. They'll help you to work out your risk appetite, match you to an investment plan that is right for you, and then they will do the rest. Search Vanguard to find out more. When investing, your capital is at risk. Tax rules apply. This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money.
Tom, we often talk about how to organise our finances. I'm very conscious that I'm paying for a lot of mad subscriptions. And there's one thing that we've talked about often on this show. It's the thing that we probably hate more than any other, and it's a hidden fee. I would love to get my finances under control. There are all these things piling up on our bank statements, and I think I need to fix this problem. I need to sort this out and to stop this.
I mean, my finances are so chaotic that I need this app.
So I'll tell you what it is. It's called Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and it helps to lower your bills so that you can grow your savings.
With Rocket Money, you can track all of your subscriptions and you can easily cancel within the app with just a few taps, saving you time, avoiding charges. And you can also set budgets and goals and get personalized insights and regular reports to track how you're doing. They will even send you real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, refunds, and even low balances. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
That's rocketmoney.com/ishistory. rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
Hello and welcome back to The Rest is History. The Battle of Copenhagen is blazing. The Danish line is cracking. But in the rear, the elderly Admiral Parker, not one of life's centre forwards, I think. He's always been anxious about probing the Danish defences too close. He's got cold feet. He's decided to call it a day and he has hoisted Signal 39, discontinue the action. So basically, just as Nelson is on the verge of winning a decisive victory, he's saying, no, come back. So the massive question, Dominic, what's Nelson going to do?
Well, he has to make up his mind straight away. He's got very, very little time because, of course, they're in the heat of battle. And I think his mind works fast. He weighs up the balance of forces. If he ignores the signal, ignores a direct order, he thinks, in fact, he's almost certain he can win. He knows the Danish line is cracking. He knows some of the guns are being put out of action. He knows that his men are well trained, they're fit, they're experienced, and the balance will tip in their favor all the time. Now, if he breaks off, under Danish fire, they have to retreat, get out of the King's Deep, get around the shoals, and rejoin the rest of the squadron.
Yeah. And as they turn, then they're subject to kind of raking fire. So it's lethal. So, clearly Nelson's instinct is absolutely to carry on fighting. But just to emphasize, it is a big deal for an officer in the heat of battle, any time, but particularly in the heat of battle, to ignore a direct order. And should the battle not go well, then this will be the end of Nelson's career.
Yes, it would. Exactly, it would. He does have form, though. So at the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, he had ignored Sir John Jervis's direct orders, his plan. He had gone out of the line and he had sort of launched this solo mission that basically changed the whole course of the battle. So sometimes, when he backs his own judgment, it pays off. So it takes him just a moment and he mutters, Colonel Stewart hears him mutter under his breath, "Leave off action. No, damn me if I do." And a lieutenant says, "Shall we repeat the signal?" In other words, transmit the signal to the rest of our ships. Nelson says, "Acknowledge it, but do not repeat it. Keep signal 16 aloft. That is the signal. Engage the enemy more closely."
And the thing about that is, it's reflective of Nelson's confidence that he has more authority over the line of battle than the ostensible commander-in-chief does.
Yeah.
And we will see if he's right to be that confident.
Now, the other men on the quarterdeck know that this is rank insubordination. I think it's pretty clear that Captain Foley is shocked by it because he effectively seems to ask for confirmation. "Are you sure, sir?" or something along those lines. Or maybe he just raises an eyebrow, who knows. Now, what happens next? Here is the story that every British schoolchild used to learn.
And still should.
Absolutely, they should.
Let's be honest.
Nelson says to Foley, Foley, I have only one eye. I have a right to be blind sometimes." And then, a great gesture, pure Nelsonian theatre, he reaches for a telescope and he puts it to his sightless eye, the one that can't see, and he says, "I really do not see the signal." Now, the sad thing about this story is that some of Nelson's biographers, I'm sorry to say, let themselves down by doubting it. Isn't that right?
I don't think it's sad because I think it's up there with, Alfred burning the cakes.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Robert the Bruce and the Spider, or it's Drake and the Armada. So the Armada arrives and Drake's playing a game of bowls and he says, "It's time to finish the game and beat the Armada too." And he does.
And the thing is that all these stories, they have the power that they do because they're very dramatic, but also because they illustrate the truth of the circumstances. We've done Greek myths. Myths have a power that isn't directly dependent on whether they are factually true or not. However, of course, historians are going to scoff at this kind of thing. But equally, there are those who say, well, I think it's more likely this happened than that Alfred burnt his cakes, for instance.
Absolutely. And actually, John Sugden, who's spent an enormous amount of ink on this particular story, looking at the provenance of it, all the different accounts. So basically, Colonel Stewart told his story about what happened on the quarterdeck several times in the next 10 years or so. And as so often with anecdotes, the anecdotes slightly changed in each telling.
Improved, one might say.
Yeah, it improved.
Yeah.
But Sugden says, listen, you can doubt it and you can say, well, the very, very earliest stories about what happened on the quarterdeck don't mention it. But that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Does it have the ring of implausibility? I mean, it sounds perfectly plausible, right?
That's the key. So Sugden says the telescope story is entirely in Nelson's character. He never forgot his audience. And that could either mean that people assume it's true because it sounds right.
Yes.
But equally, it could be true because Nelson would do it. I mean, I think the one thing that's definitely not true is the kind of thing that you will often see on illustrations of this scene that shows Nelson raising his telescope to an eye patch. And we have already emphasized Nelson did not wear a kind of pirate eye patch.
But I think we've concluded, haven't we, Tom, that it absolutely happened. And in many ways, it happened more bravely than people have given Nelson credit for.
I think so.
So he's taken this incredible risk. And actually, here is the ultimate demonstration of Nelson's reputation among his fellow captains. Everybody follows his lead. None of the other warship captains question him. None of them break off the attack. Of course, in that case, they would be disobeying Nelson. And there's no recrimination afterwards.
There is one captain who does obey Parker's orders, and this is Edward Riou, who Nelson particularly admires. He's shown a great initiative. He's gone to the top of the line, but he is a very, very junior officer. It's a massive, massive deal for him, much more than for Nelson's more established captains, to break an order. And so he very, very reluctantly gives his squadron of 5 ships the order to withdraw. I mean, he keeps on fighting for half an hour, but ultimately he thinks, I've been given a direct order. I've got to obey it. And you were saying how had Nelson ordered a withdrawal, this would have been calamitous for the entire British line. And the fate of Riou illustrates this, because what happens is that as his squadron of frigates starts to turn and withdraw and stop firing, the gun smoke clears, and Riou's own ship, which is the last to withdraw, there is no disguise now. It's open fire for the Danish gunners. And we have an account from Colonel Stewart, who was with Nelson, who may or may not have seen him putting his telescope to his blind eye, who describes what happened. So this is Stewart on Riou. He had expressed himself grieved at being obliged to retreat and nobly observed, "What will Nelson think of us?" His clerk was killed by his side, and by another shot, several Marines, while hauling on the main brace, shared the same fate. Riou then exclaimed, "Come then, my boys, let us all die together." And the words were scarcely uttered when the fatal shot severed him in two.
That's very moving.
Yeah.
How does Colonel Stewart know, by the way, because he's on a different ship?
I imagine that it's reported to him.
Listen, I'm never going to be skeptical about a story like this.
Of course. I mean, again, what will Nelson think of us? Come then, my boys, let us all die together.
Yeah.
I mean, you might think these phrases are too good to be true, but I think it's striking that Riou is a particular favourite of Nelson's. He's only met him on the course of this expedition. And clearly there is a kind of self-dramatising quality to Riou's heroism that Nelson really identifies with. So again, I think it's perfectly plausible he said that.
Yeah, just like the telescope. The self-dramatising is driven from the top. You have a man who is constructing his life as though he's on the stage, I would say, and so other people follow suit.
And Nelson says that Riou's loss is almost the worst loss of the battle, that he would have gone on to really great things.
Right. So back at the harbour, it's about 2:00, huge, great clouds of black smoke. The air is thick with kind of screams and explosions. The Danes are fighting manfully, but they're in real trouble now. By about 2:00, the Dannebrog, their flagship, is burning. By about 2:30, its gun crews have been completely slaughtered and the flag comes down and the survivors have to flee for the shore. The Danish commander is a bloke called Commodore Olfert Fischer, and he's already moved his flag to another ship, the Holsten. About the same time, that ship's overpowered as well, and he has to take refuge in one of the forts, the Trekkoner fort. So it's very clear the British have the upper hand. They don't have things entirely their own way, though. I mean, this is still a really, this is what makes Nelson's call so dicey, is that it's still pretty tight. And, some of his ships, the Monarch and the Defiance, are really taking terrible, terrible punishment. The Danish batteries are still intact. They're still firing relentlessly. And now I think Nelson does one of the most impressive things he ever did in a battle, because he's not just about get up close and batter them and then we'll win. He's also thinking politically.
Yeah, he's an Achilles, but he's a calculating Achilles.
Exactly. So he goes down below for a second and he scribbles a note that is basically offering the Danes a deal. And then he gives it to a bloke called Frederick Thesiger, who speaks Danish, and says, can you get in a little boat, go over to the shore under a flag of truce, find Crown Prince Frederick, and give him this note.
And Crown Prince Frederick is George III's nephew.
Yes.
So, there are certain familial bonds.
Exactly. Now, why did Nelson do this? Afterwards, he always said, I did it because basically I'm a very kind person and I wanted to spare the Danes any more bloodshed.
But Dominic, I think that's true. I mean, it sounds counterintuitive. Nelson, he wants to practice battles of annihilation, but he does that for the broader purpose, I think. And if he had the option of not spilling blood, but still serving Britain, then he would do that. And it was striking that in the peace negotiations that culminates in the Treaty of Amiens, Nelson's backing it.
Yeah.
He wants peace. And I think it's important for people to bear that in mind. He is not animated by a bloodlust.
I think that's right. He later told Henry Addington, who became Prime Minister, he said to Addington, those Danish ships that had surrendered were trapped in the killing zone. They couldn't get away. And they're being hit by friendly fire from their own batteries. It was a massacre, a sight which no real man could have enjoyed. I felt when the Danes became my prisoners, I became their protector. In other words, loads of Danes are being killed in the crossfire, and I want to save them. And he actually wrote to Emma, didn't he, and said, Nelson is a warrior, but he will not be a butcher. Really good sign that he's talking about himself in the third person, I always think.
Like Caesar.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't get Caesar saying that. So I think we can agree that this reflects very well on Nelson. Listeners can admire him wholeheartedly on this.
He's absolutely right. You see, Napoleon is a butcher. Napoleon, when he invades Italy, leaves a trail of looted and pillaged villages and blood and whatnot, and actually wants to terrify the civilian population into, remaining compliant. Nelson has no real history of that.
His critics might say Naples, but I think Naples stands out as the most controversial episode in his career precisely because
it's unusual.
Because it's unusual, yeah.
Now, some of his own officers, I have to say, thought there was something slightly more to it. So Hardy said, for example, it's not just about humanitarianism. He wanted to get off the prizes, the Danish prizes that hadn't been sunk or burnt. And he also was doing it to protect his own ships. This is Hardy talking, 5 of which at this time were on shore within gunshot of the batteries. In other words, they were sort of trapped on the shoals. Colonel Stewart, he wrote about this. He said it was, quote, a masterpiece of policy. It was the only way for Nelson to save those grounded British ships. They got stuck and they were in quote, a most perilous situation. And most historians who've written about this say, whatever the swirl of motives that went into this, it was really, really canny. One of his supreme battle decisions, says Roger Knight. So this bloke Thesiger, he arrives at the Citadel in Copenhagen. He takes the note to the Crown Prince. And Nelson, it's a masterpiece of diplomacy because Nelson has addressed it to, and I quote, the brothers of Englishmen, the Danes. No higher praise. And he says, I will absolutely flatten you if I have to, but I really, really don't want to. I'd rather save the brave Danes who have defended your forts. And he says to the Crown Prince, I'd love to make a deal with you. Peace and friendship with Denmark would be the greatest victory that I've ever gained.
A dry eye in the house.
Yeah. And the Crown Prince is an intelligent guy. He can see that this is the perfect way to save his men, to save Copenhagen, the city and its dockyards from assault, and to keep his honor. It's basically a good outcome for the Danes.
And presumably also, the issue for the Danes is that they don't want to be attacked by the French or indeed the Russians.
Yeah.
So essentially, they've put up a good enough show that they can say to the French and Russian ministers, well, we did our best, but what choice did we have? I mean, because ultimately, they're not really committed to the war against Britain.
No.
They had to choose between France and Britain. They chose France because they thought the French were more of a threat. So in a way, they don't want to lose lots of lives. They don't want to have their capital city demolished in the cause of a war with Britain.
This is a great outcome for the Danes. As we will see, I was about to say they should be thanking us. as we will see, they kind of do. So the Crown Prince says, fine, we'll have a ceasefire, we'll open some talks. And it takes about half an hour for the fighting to die down and the battle is over. So in all, the British have lost about 250 men killed. The Danes have lost about 500. They've lost 2 ships completely destroyed, and 12 of their ships have been captured. Not a huge amount, you might say, but this is a small country. So this is a heavy toll.
Yeah.
And the ferocity of the fighting, the intensity of the carnage was of a quality that a lot of the experienced British sailors said, this was in a different league from the Nile even, or Cape St. Vincent or something. I think because it's such a tight channel, such withering fire, such close range action.
So many bodies kind of bobbing everywhere.
Yeah.
Blood on the water. Yeah, I mean, hideous.
Captain Fremantle, Thomas Fremantle, had been in 2 of Nelson's fights before. He'd been in the battle over the Saïra, if you remember that, in the 1790s, and the Nile. And he said the carnage on board the Danish vessels exceeds anything I ever heard of. And everybody in the British fleet said, God, the Danes, they really fought well. So one of Nelson's men, Thomas Wilkes, wrote home, says, I will do the Danes the credit to say they fought well, far better than I've ever found from the French or the Spaniards.
Well, the Danes are not a serious enemy for the British, unlike the French or the Spaniards. So in a sense, by praising the Danes relative to their more serious enemies, it's a good propaganda twist, isn't it?
It is indeed. So Nelson is absolutely shattered, isn't he? Because he hasn't been sleeping, and not surprisingly, because he's been so stressed.
So just to talk about what Nelson does after the battle, and to put it in the context of what he's been doing over the previous 2 days, he's been preparing his battle plans. He stayed up all night drawing them and getting them ready with Captain Riou. He has led and fought a great battle. He suffered physical danger. He's been tormented by the tension of knowing whether his plans are going to come off or not. He's witnessed hideous carnage. He's directly disobeyed an order from his superior. He's done this kind of diplomatic gambit of opening negotiations with the Danes. He has secured a stunning, overwhelming victory against all the odds. He's gazed at the horrors of the straits, the seas littered with corpses, mourning the losses both of his own sailors and those of the Danes, which made his heart run out of his eyes, quoting there. He has returned from the Elephant to his cabin on the St. George, because, he can sail back and get on his original flagship. He's gone to his cabin. He's taken out his journal. He's recorded the details of the day. He then records that he felt very unwell, unsurprisingly. And then, after all that, he reaches for a piece of paper, picks up his pen, and he writes a letter to Emma, accusing her of keeping scandalous company with the Prince of Wales. That's his priority. After all that, works himself up into an absolute state, and he's on the verge of collapsing. And then he calms down, and he writes Emma a poem. East, west, north, south, our minds shall never part. Your angel's lodestone shall be Nelson's heart.
Oh.
And having written that, he then lies down on his cot and passes out and sleeps for about 6 hours. I just think it's the most Nelson series of events you could possibly imagine.
It is.
It's the combination of unbelievable heroism and achievement combined with a kind of comical erotic obsession.
Well, not only that, Tom, but the Prince of Wales, the future George IV, one of the worst men who ever lived, is living rent-free in Nelson's head, isn't he?
Yes. It's the first thing he thinks of when he gets back to his cabin.
Right. So he has this sleep. The next day, the 3rd of April, he and Hardy go ashore to negotiate personally with the Crown Prince. And this really is a lovely scene. This is why they should make a film of this. They land at the South Customs House Quay in Copenhagen, and there are huge crowds waiting. And the Crown Prince has sent guards to escort them. But actually, they don't need the guards because the crowds are so friendly. Nelson is a celebrity. This is the weird thing. He's attacked their capital, but people are quite excited to see him. They're offered a carriage, and they say, well, no, we don't need the carriage. So they walk down the main street towards the palace. And Hardy says that Nelson was received with as much admiration as when we went to the Lord Mayor's show in London.
And does Nelson enjoy this?
Of course he does.
Of course he does.
Nelson loves it. He writes afterwards, quite rightly, "I am spoilt. All my astonishment is that my head is not turned."
Oh, it's such modesty.
Such humility. It's nice of him to compliment himself on his own level-headedness. Anyway, they get in to see the Crown Prince. And Nelson says, "Look, why are you in bed with the Russians? That's a terrible decision. We are your true friends." And his argument is the Russians have misled you. We're never going to accept this armed neutrality stuff. Our national survival depends on us being able to, have these blockades. It's the only way we can fight the French.
I mean, I suppose that's true.
Yeah.
But the issue for the Danes remains that the Russians are much closer than the British.
Yeah.
And, the French are even more menacing than that.
Right. And the Danes want to trade and they want to do all this. So the talks, they go on for a few days. So long, in fact, that Nelson is able to bunk off to the Royal Copenhagen Porcelain Company, where he orders a dinner service for Emma.
Brilliant.
So again, he's laser focused on the main issues. And then on the 6th day of talks, which is the 8th of April, it's a terrible day, pouring rain, very miserable. Actually, when Nelson and his officials turn up at the palace, they're so bedraggled, they have to stand by the fire for ages to dry out before they can be shown into the meeting. They get in and the Crown Prince says, "Okay, fine, we've got a deal. We will remain neutral for the next few months. That'll give you time to deal with the Russians. Now, in return, we will resupply you and restock your ships and stuff. You have to buy it all from us. We're happy to do that." Nelson says, "Brilliant. What a great deal this is." Now, only afterwards does he find out why they've come to the deal, because they know something that he doesn't. The Crown Prince has had intelligence from St. Petersburg, bombshell news. So you described Tsar Paul I. He's a very strange and disagreeable man with his obsession with people wearing the wrong hats and waistcoats and things.
It's so what you want from a mad Tsar.
And Russian officers have been plotting against him for months, and they've finally acted. They burst into his apartment at St. Michael's Castle in St. Petersburg. They cornered him in his bedroom. He was hiding behind the curtains. They dragged him out. They beat him over the head with a paperweight, and then they strangled him to death with his own scarf.
So quite Rasputin.
Well, it's just standard Russian political behavior, no?
Yeah.
So basically, the League of Armed Neutrality that he had set up is now doomed. And in fact, his successor, Alexander I, who ends up changing sides multiple times in the Napoleonic Wars, one of his first acts is to make peace with Britain.
A good start to the reign.
Yeah, sensible policies for a happier Russia. So all's well that ends well. There's only one person who's slightly down in the dumps. And guess who that is? It is, of course, Nelson.
Is he complaining about how ill he feels?
Yeah. So he sinks immediately into massive self-pity, hypochondria, complaining about headaches and his eyes and all this sort of thing. I mean, to be fair to him, it's not quite over yet, because when the deal is done with the Danes, he doesn't know that the Russians are about to pull out. And in fact, he thinks the Swedes are still involved. So he spends ages sailing around the Baltic, kind of looking for the Swedes in this terrible weather.
And he ends up commander-in-chief of the British fleet because poor old Sir Hyde Parker has been recalled because news of the order that he gave Nelson has come out, and people blame him for giving it rather than blame Nelson for disobeying it. And it has to be said that Nelson's very decent. He never mentions it.
Yeah.
I think it's Colonel Stewart who lets slip about it.
He's always telling stories, isn't he? But then when Nelson's looking for the Swedes, we get one of the best ever Nelson stories, which is actually reproduced in the Peter Weir Master and Commander film. So he's out in a little boat, isn't he? The boat is from HMS Bellona, and they're looking for the Swedes. And the master of the boat said afterwards, "It was extremely cold, and I wished him to put on a greatcoat of mine, which was in the boat." And Nelson said to him, "No, I am not cold. My anxiety for my country will keep me warm."
His zeal for king and country.
In the film, it's zeal for king and country. And Russell Crowe says, if it was any other man, you'd say this is poor stuff.
But with Nelson, you believe it.
Yeah, you felt your heart glow. It's brilliant.
But it is mad from Nelson, isn't it? If he's that ill and he's going out on the Baltic Sea without a coat.
Yeah.
I mean, he's asking for it, really.
Yeah, it's great stuff that we can laugh about it now. But at the time, he nearly dies because he's got this fever. He's coughing so badly that everyone thinks he's got TB. He's having what he calls heart strokes. Hard to work out what these are. They're almost like panic attacks, I think.
Palpitations or something, I guess.
Yeah. And his officers are really worried about him. And actually, when people go back to London, they say, "You've got to recall Nelson from the Baltic. I mean, if you leave him out there, he will die."
Well, it's funny because the Earl of St. Vincent, so Sir John Jervis, who knows Nelson obviously incredibly well, when these reports that Nelson's ill arrive in London, to begin with, he says absolutely nothing to worry about. So he tells the king, Nelson is always in the habit of complaining of ill health, with the implication, just ignore it. And then a week later, the reports are so serious that he becomes alarmed too, and wheels are set in motion, and Nelson is brought back.
So the orders reach him in midsummer, and by the 29th of July, he lands in Yarmouth once again, greeted by huge crowds, ringing bells, all of this stuff. It's actually quite similar to the scene 9 months earlier when he landed with the Hamiltons. The difference is there was a huge shadow that time, and there isn't the same shadow this time. I mean, Emma is waiting for him. And of course, this saga, the Emma-Fanny saga, is not quite over. You know, Nelson, Emma has been on his mind every minute of every day, hasn't she? And he's sent her tons of presents.
Well, he's got all that porcelain set from Copenhagen.
Porcelain, bottles of wine, Danish wine. That's an odd...
Yeah, I mean, that's mad.
Yeah, that's right.
Going to Scandinavia to buy wine.
Yeah, that's that. I've only just thought that.
Not showing Nelson as his most astute.
That's the worst decision that Nelson ever made.
I mean, Cronenberg, perhaps, but...
Yeah. And he's also bought a lot of prints for her Nelson room. And in the next episode, we shall be getting into the decor of their house, which is, I think, alarming, but would go down very well, I think, with the current incumbent of the White House. Now, sad to say, poor Fanny, Nelson's wife, has not quite given up hope of winning him back. So when he won the Battle of Copenhagen, she wrote him a letter of congratulation, which he completely and utterly ignored. And Edmund, his father, wrote to tell him off and said, Fanny, your wife, was heavily affected with her personal feelings and not receiving a line from your own hand. And Nelson said to his father, I don't care. My mind is fixed. I want to be left to myself and without any inquiries from her. And Fanny still hasn't really got the message or hasn't given up, because she sent his friend Alexander Davison what I find a very, very sad and moving letter. She said, when she heard Nelson was coming home, my heart was all thankfulness and pleasure, but a moment's unwelcome and intruding reflection made me truly a miserable and pitiable being. I love him. I would do anything in the world to convince him of my affection. And then I think this is the very sad bit. She says, surely I have angered him. It was done unconsciously and without the least intention, but my desire was to please him, and if he will have the goodness to send for me, I will make it my study to obey him in every wish. She just doesn't get that there's nothing she can do.
So at the weekend, I went to number 1 London, Apsley House, where the Duke of Wellington had his house. And they had an exhibition on him, and they talked about his relationship with his wife. Like Nelson found Fanny, Wellington found his wife boring. And I think it was very similar that Wellington, like Nelson, spends long periods abroad, and he lives his life at an excruciating pitch. And I suspect that in both cases, they come to feel that their wives are boring, that they don't inhabit the same kind of zone. They're not part of the vibe of excitement and heroism and glamour that overseas service offers them. And in Nelson's case, Emma does. He replies to all the demands that he see Fanny and says that he's committed to building his life around a wife more suited to my genius.
Yeah. I don't think you could get away with saying that today, could you? I mean, people would think very poorly of you.
I think you can if you're Nelson.
Maybe.
I mean, obviously, it's terrible. He treats Fanny terribly. You know, we've gone through that. At the same time, I guess you're with someone you find boring, you meet someone who you find intoxicating. What are you going to do?
Yeah. Do you know who agrees with you? Theo, because he's written in the chat, enough about Fanny. It's poor from Theo. Yeah. Right. So since Theo is our overlord, we'll get to the end. On the 1st of July, Nelson arrives back in London and he goes straight to the Admiralty. Now, in the eyes of the Admiralty, he has redeemed himself. He has upheld Britain's national security. He has reaffirmed the Royal Navy's command of the seas.
And there's never any whisper, is there, of criticism for him about disobeying orders?
No, just like Cape St. Vincent. If you gamble and it pays off, you're laughing. And he's done it not just by killing, but by diplomacy. I mean, that's the really impressive thing about Nelson at Copenhagen. You know, he's proved himself a politician as well as a warrior. But when he gets to the Admiralty, long faces greet him, because while he has been away, there has been bombshell intelligence from across the Channel. Because while Nelson has been in the Baltic, The new first consul of France, Napoleon Bonaparte, has been raising an enormous new army. And this time, I am sorry to say, Bonaparte's target is not Naples or Constantinople or Egypt. His cruel and greedy eyes are set on the coast of England.
Absolute scenes. So will Napoleon try an invasion of England? Will Nelson be able to stop him? There is literally only one way to find out, and that is to listen to our next episode, which will be out on Thursday if you are not a club member. But if you are a club member, you can hear that and the final 2 episodes of this epic series straight away. And if you're not a club member and you would like to be able to hear these episodes immediately, then you just have to go to therestishistory.com and sign up there. And of course, it comes with a whole slew of additional benefits, doesn't it, Dominic? One of which this week, coming out on Friday, I will be talking to Mary Beard about another great military commander, Julius Caesar. So just sensational value, as we've said.
Wonderful stuff.
Dominic, thanks so much for that. We will be back with Napoleon's greedy eyes set on England, and we will see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.